Hi, Victor Chang here from SaaSceo.com. Today I'll be talking about three commonly used but often confusing terms: IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. These are acronyms that stand for Infrastructure as a Service, Platform as a Service, and Software as a Service. I'm going to explain these terms in non-technical language intended for a non-technical audience. Let's go ahead and get started. To understand what these three terms mean, you need to understand how technology works. Here I have an illustration or diagram of a technology stack. A technology stack refers to the different layers of technology needed to run a typical web application that you might use on the internet or within the large company. Okay? And so these technologies have different providers and manufacturers and vendors that get combined together to give you the business functionality or the consumer functionality you'll be used to in a typical business or consumer software application. So let me explain what each layer means and then how these different three acronyms differ with respect to this particular technology stack. So networking refers to the internet connection. If the internet goes down, who's responsible? Are you responsible, or do you want a vendor to take care of that for you? Do you want to outsource it? Physical server and physical storage devices. There are physical computers needed to run web-based applications, whether that's web on the public internet or web within a company. So do you want to be managing servers? Do you want to worry about creating air conditioning to cool servers that run very hot and don't work very well when they're overheated? Do you want to worry about hard drives that fail? Because hard drives do fail. If that's something you want to outsource, we'll talk more about how you do that and what kind of provider or vendor you would use for that. Virtualized servers refers to taking a very large computer with an incredible amount of computing resources and partitioning the resources so that different companies or different departments within a company could use. It's a way of segregating those computing resources in a way that's more useful for departments and companies, so that the virtual server is somehow separate from the physical hardware underneath it that is used to run it. This allows sharing of computing resources without having security issues of different users and different companies having access to each other's data and computing power. Everything's segregated. That's what's called a virtualized server. Finally, we have the operating system, software like Linux and Windows, Apple OS X. Every application requires an operating system that manages the computer hardware underneath it. Middleware refers to technology that allows two different computers to talk to each other. The web browser is what allows a human being to interact with a piece of software. The middleware is sort of the computer systems version of web browser that allows it to interact with other computer systems. So for machine-to-machine communications, you use middleware. For human-to-machine communication, we use a web browser or a phone app. Then we have something called runtime engines. These are the software that's run sort of in the background that lets applications that you and I use every day to operate. This includes running database software systems that allow database records to be processed, and includes running interpreters for various programming languages like Java or PHP. It takes that raw code, executes it, and makes it do things on the computer. Those are all called runtime engines. Then we have data or data records. This could be anything from a database record or storing files and folders and documents, PDF documents, images, and whatnot. And finally, we have the application or the application code that provides the business or consumer functionality that end users are typically looking for. So that's a pretty typical example of a technology stack. Now, where these three terms, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, come in is it refers to outsourcing the management of these different layers of technology. Before cloud computing, software applications were really managed in-house, what's now termed on-premise software. That means a large company would buy technologies from all the vendors that sell technology at different layers of this technology stack, and they would manage it all in-house. So they would bring in the internet connections. They'd buy physical computers and servers and physical hard drives, sometimes hundreds of them. They would buy the software that manages the virtualized servers. They would be patching and running security updates on operating system software, as well as middleware, and running all the updates and software patches and security patches for runtime engines, manage data, and manage the application itself. Now, with cloud computing, there were more options that become available, and that's where IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS comes in. So if you are a company and you don't want to manage the entire technology stack, you have three options that you can use in order to outsource portions of the technology stack that you really don't want to be bothered with. So if you look at the first three layers of the stack, networking, physical server and storage, virtualized servers, you can rent all of this from an infrastructure as a service provider. So it becomes very easy, something you don't want to deal with. The internet goes down, hard drive fails, you don't want to deal with any of that. You at a minimum could use an infrastructure as a service provider to manage all that for you. So you never have to deal with it. If something goes down, you wouldn't even notice because the provider would notice and fix that behind the scenes for you. The next option up is using a platform as a service provider. So platform as a service provider goes beyond the infrastructure providers. So in addition to managing networking, physical server and physical storage devices, and virtualized server software, the platform as a service provider also manages the operating system, the middleware, and runtime engines. So security patches for all three of these layers, upgrading everything to the most current version, that's an ongoing process that needs to be managed by somebody. So if you don't particularly care, you just want it to work, then one option you have would be to use a platform as a service provider in order to manage all that for you so you don't have to deal with it. And finally, there's something called SaaS, or the software as a service provider. And here you're outsourcing the entire technology stack to another company. So all of it, all the infrastructure, all the platform tools, as well as managing data. This could be database records, this could be flat files, PDF files, images, and whatnot, as well as the application code and running that in a software technology environment. So for example, if you don't want to manage your own email servers in-house, for example, you might use something like Gmail, right, kind of the consumer version of Google's email software, and Google or another provider would take care of all of that, and you just use and consume the software. So those are sort of the three options. So here you see all three different types of outsourcing vendors, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, and how they differ. So at the bottom we have infrastructure as a service provider. They do the first three layers. Platform as a service provider does everything that the infrastructure providers does, plus three more layers, right? The operating system, middleware, and runtime engines. And then a software as a service provider manages the entire stack. They handle all the infrastructure, all the platform services, in addition to managing data and the application code base itself. So that's the difference between IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. Now let's talk briefly about what kinds of companies and users would use each of these different types of vendors. Typically, if you were a non-technical person and you just want software to use, like a Salesforce.com or a Gmail or something equivalent, you would typically buy your software from a SaaS vendor. You just want to use it. You don't want to deal with the code and managing all the technology underneath. If you were a company developing custom applications, or you were a solo or individual software developer, and you wanted to write code, customize it, tweak it, make it more useful for your end users, but you didn't want to manage things like security, hardware failures, and things like that, you would typically outsource all that with a platform as a service provider that would take care of all of that. If you were a software developer and you have potentially network and systems engineers that were in-house, and you had a very advanced technical capability that was able to manage operating systems and security patches and whatnot, then maybe you would manage a lot of the platform services in-house. And all you really need from a third party to manage is really the bottom infrastructure layer, the networking, physical servers, and physical storage, as well as the virtualized servers. So those are kind of three typical use cases of who would use IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS. Hey, if you found this video useful, leave me a comment, let me know what you think, and let me know if you have any questions. I'll be happy to answer them. Click subscribe near this particular video, or visit my website at SaaSCEO.com for more videos, tutorials, and articles around things related to SaaS.